Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something really thought-provoking?
Always up for a good mental workout.
Okay, well today we're taking a look at this article by Jaime Hoerricks. It's called The Lexicographer and the Fae, Decoding the Myth of Autism.
Oh, yeah, saw that one. Really interesting title.
Right, and it gets you thinking, like, what's the connection between, lexicographers and Fae and autism?
Yeah, what's the link there?
Well, that's what we're going to unpack today. So basically, the article kind of throws out this question, and get this. It asks whether trying to decode autism is actually like a form of colonial thinking.
Whoa. Okay, that's a pretty bold statement.
Right. But the way Hoerricks makes the case is really clever. Like they use this fictional story about an outsider who stumbles into the land of the Fae.
Okay, I'm intrigued already. Fae, huh? Those mythical creatures.
Exactly. And this outsider, he's like obsessed with documenting their behavior. He's got his notebook, his quill, all set to try and figure out how the Fae tick.
So he's like an anthropologist of sorts, trying to categorize and explain something that's probably beyond his understanding.
Totally. But here's the thing. The Fae, they're not like humans. They're fluid, kind of ethereal, like they move to music only they can hear.
And I bet the outsider, he's looking at all this and just scratching his head.
Oh, yeah. He calls their movements erratic, their communication primitive, their social interactions like abnormal. But the Fae, they're watching him right back, almost like they're amused by his attempts to understand them.
It makes you think about who is really observing whom here and who holds the power in that dynamic.
Exactly. And that's when Hoerricks brings in this real-world example to kind of drive the point home.
Okay, let me guess. It has something to do with how we approach autism today.
You got it. They talk about this news article about researchers using AI to, wait for it, decode autism.
Interesting. Sounds like a similar mindset to the outsider and the fae.
Right, so both the fictional outsider and these real-world researchers, they're both coming from this position of power, trying to define and categorize a community they don't belong to.
And the article is saying this is a problem, that this way of thinking is flawed.
Yeah, and to really illustrate that, Hoerricks brings up this historical figure, Robert Kirk. He was a 17th century lexicographer, like a dictionary maker, who attempted to create the first Gaelic dictionary.
A Gaelic dictionary? What does that have to do with autism?
Well, Kirk, even though he was Scottish himself, wasn't deeply immersed in Gaelic culture. He approached the language with this colonial mindset. He tried to force its rich poetic forms into these rigid English-based definitions.
So he kind of missed the point, like the essence of the language itself.
Exactly. And Hoerricks is suggesting that sometimes our attempts to understand autism can be kind of similar. Like we try to normalize it to fit it into a neurotypical box, and in doing so, we might be missing out on its unique beauty and logic.
That's a powerful comparison, but I'm still wondering, where does this Autism Cares Act fit into all of this?
That's where things get even more interesting. So remember how Kirk was working during a time of major upheaval in Scotland, a time when Gaelic culture was being actively suppressed.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
Well, Hoerricks points out that Kirk's dictionary, it wasn't just this innocent scholarly pursuit. It was actually part of a broader colonial project.
So his work, even if he didn't intend it that way, contributed to the erasure of Gaelic culture.
Exactly. And they argue that the Autism Cares Act, despite its well-intentioned name, can sometimes do something similar.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, a lot of the funding from the Act goes towards research and initiatives that focus on, pathologizing autism, on controlling behaviors rather than truly understanding and supporting autistic people.
Oh, wow. So are we saying that just like Kirk's work was part of a system that aimed to assimilate Gaelic culture, some efforts around autism are more about forcing autistic people to fit into a neurotypical world?
That's the question Hoerricks wants us to wrestle with. Are we, even with the best intentions, sometimes perpetuating this kind of colonial mindset?
If we're always trying to decode and fix autism, what are we missing out on?
Right. What unique perspectives and talents are we overlooking? What would a world that truly embraces neurodiversity look like?
Big questions.
Yeah,
And ones we need to think about carefully.
definitely. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring further in this deep dive. So stick with us, because this is just the beginning.
Can't wait to see where this goes.
Yeah, it's are we trying to turn people into equations? Just data points to be analyzed.
Right, and that's the thing about this colonial mindset, you know? Instead of appreciating the differences and seeing the value in those differences, we just try to, I don't know, force everything into these neat little categories.
It's we're so obsessed with normal, right? Normal versus abnormal.
Exactly, we miss out on all the cool stuff, like that outsider in the Feylands, he's just missing out on all that magic. just because he
Yeah.
can't categorize it.
Okay, so let's say we do like step back from this whole decoding thing. What's a better way to approach autism then?
Well, it starts with looking at it differently. Like, instead of seeing it as a problem that needs fixing, we
Yeah.
need to see it as a different way of experiencing the world.
So like focus on strengths instead of deficits.
Yeah, like a lot of autistic people have this incredible focus, and attention to detail.
So it's more about embracing neurodiversity instead of trying to make everyone be neurotypical.
Exactly. Like, we need to be listening to autistic people, learning from their experiences, and creating a society that actually values those differences.
That makes sense, but how do we make that happen? Like, that sounds great in theory, creating a more inclusive society, but how do we actually do it?
Well, think about our education system. It's designed for this very specific kind of learner.
Right. Like, there's not a lot of room for kids who learn or think differently.
Yeah, and I was reading about some schools that are doing some really cool things, like
Yes.
having sensory rooms and being more flexible with how they teach.
That's awesome. So we need to be more aware, like, sensory stuff
Right.
and different learning styles.
Yeah.
Totally. And it goes beyond schools, too, right? Like, think about workplaces.
Yeah.
Making them less overwhelming, more accommodating. Or healthcare, like making sure autistic people feel heard and understood.
I mean, it sounds like a lot to change.
Oh, it is. But it's important, right? If we want to have a society that actually values diversity, and this isn't just about autism, is it? It's about how we treat anyone who's different.
That's so true. Like, what if everyone was just the same? Think how boring that would be. No new ideas.
Exactly. We need those differences. Like that world without the Fae, remember? Kind of bland.
Okay, but then the question is, how do we make sure that doesn't happen? Like, how do we keep the magic of diversity alive?
That's a big question, isn't it? Like, where do we even begin?
Yeah, because there's no easy fix, right?
Right.
It's not like we can just snap our fingers.
Nope. But we can start by making small changes, both in our own lives and, working to change bigger systems. Like, it starts with education, challenging our own biases.
So, like, the choices we make every day.
Yeah. Like what we say, how we treat people, the things we support, like it all adds up.
It's pretty wild to think about how we started with this fictional story about Faye, right? And now we're talking about these huge issues.
It is. Like, stories have so much power, don't they? Like, to make us think about things in a new way.
Definitely. But then there's the whole question of, okay, we've been thinking about this stuff, now what? How do we actually put it into practice?
It's got to start with each of us, right? Like,
Yeah.
asking ourselves tough questions, like about our own biases. Like, how can I be a better ally?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have all the answers right now.
And that's okay. The important thing is that we're asking those questions and that we're open to learning and growing.
Like being comfortable with not knowing everything, but still wanting to learn.
Yeah. It's a journey, right? Not a destination. And the more open we are to that, the more we can appreciate the world around us, like all its complexity.
I love that. Like, it makes me think of that line in the article. Will we realize before it's too late the price of our conquest?
Oh, yeah. That's a powerful one. Like, what are we willing to give up just to make everything the same? Like, what do we lose when we try to, erase all the differences?
It's definitely something we all need to be thinking about.
For sure. And I think the answers are all around us, Like, it's not about some big solution. It's about the small choices we make each day, like how we treat each other, the stories we tell, the world we build together. Like, those little acts of kindness and understanding, those can really change things.
Maybe if enough of us do that, that we can create a world where being different isn't something to be afraid of, like where everyone can just be themselves.
That's a great image, and it makes me think maybe that magic we were talking about, it's not out there somewhere, like in some faraway land. Maybe it's something we create, like together.
I like that a lot. Yeah, it really makes you think, like, what even is magic in this world, right? Like, we're so focused on explaining everything.
It's true. We kind of forget about the things we can't explain, like the things that make us feel awe or wonder. Like, those things are important too.
Totally. Like, maybe that's where real progress is. Not in erasing those differences, but like actually embracing the things that make each of us, unique.
Yeah, for sure. Those differences, like even the things that seem weird or whatever, like those can be the things that make people brilliant or creative.
It's like that Einstein quote, right? The measure of intelligence is the ability to change.
Oh, I like that one. So true. Like, real change comes from people who think differently, who question things. But how do we take all these big ideas about neurodiversity and colonial thinking and magic and actually apply it to our own lives?
Right, that's the big question. It can feel kind of overwhelming.
It can. But I think it starts with just being more mindful, You know,
Right.
like what are we saying? What are we assuming? How are we treating other people?
So like paying attention to the language we use, like making sure we're not reinforcing negative stereotypes without even realizing it.
Exactly. And being willing to, learn, like actively seeking out different perspectives, asking questions instead of just assuming we know everything.
Being okay with not knowing all the answers
Yeah, right.
and being open to having our minds change.
Yeah, that's huge. And remember, like, progress isn't about reaching some perfect state of like inclusion or whatever. It's about trying to do better,
Yeah.
even when it's hard.
It's like that outsider in the Fey lands, right? Maybe it's not about conquering the unknown, but letting it change you, letting it, teach you something.
I love that. That's really beautiful. Like, growth comes from being open to new things, from seeing the world in new ways.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we're left with this like challenge, right? How can we each do our part to create a world where like differences are celebrated, neurodiversity is embraced, like a world where everyone can just, be themselves and thrive?
It's a big challenge for sure, but I think it's one worth taking on. And who knows, maybe we'll find a little bit of that magic along the way.
Maybe we will. Well, we've covered a lot today, and we hope this has given you all some food for thought. So if the fads are out there building their own worlds, what can we learn from them? How can we make sure everyone feels seen and valued? Those are some questions to ponder. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.